Leslie here, and today on Gamefoodie, we're going to be making kimchi. Kimchi is a traditional lacto-fermented cabbage dish created in Korea, but it's also eaten in many other Asian countries like Japan and China. As proof by this video, it's also big here in America as well. It's spicy, savory, got a little umami, and delicious. And if you don't like cabbage, don't feel bad because there's different types of kimchi. But today, we're going to be focusing on the traditional version of kimchi, so let's get right to it. Alright, so the first thing you're going to need is 2 large napa cabbage. You do want to try to make sure you can get the best that your supermarket has to offer. Of course, these aren't really the best ones, but they will work. Next, you're going to need a bunch of green onion. I personally love green onion, but you can add as little or as much as you like. You're going to need 1 large white onion. I have 2 small nuggets of ginger, which are peeled. This should be about 3 tablespoons. For a little sweetness, I have 3 medium-sized carrots peeled. I have a daikon radish. It is more traditional to use a Korean radish, but daikon is easy to find where I live. I've even used some of those little red ones and it's turned out pretty good, so feel free to use whatever you can find. I'm going to use an entire bulb of garlic. To balance the flavors and add a little bit more sweetness and juiciness, I have an anju pear. People usually use the Asian pears, which are more round in shape compared to our pears in America, but I couldn't really find any in time for the video. I've also heard some people use apples. Next, I have 2 cups of water. I have about 4 tablespoons of mochiko sweet rice flour or glutinous flour. This is about 1/2 cup of fish sauce. It adds a bit of funkiness and has a very distinct flavor. Very good stuff. And last but not least, I have about 1.5 cup of Korean style hot pepper flakes or gochugaru. Now this is the most important ingredient as it cannot be substituted. Now if you want to pick up the same rice flour and gochugaru that I'm using, I will have these items linked below in the description. And that's all of our ingredients. Since we're doing some fermenting, we have to make sure everything that we do is very clean and sterile, as we do not want to grow bad bacteria. So go ahead and grab the biggest pot you own and fill it with enough water to cover the vessels you will be using to store your kimchi. Go ahead and bring your water to a boil. I'm using these plastic BPA-free containers, but you can use anything that won't leach nasty chemicals and things into your food. Put the containers into the water, making sure that they're submerged. You also want to do this with the lids as well. I like to cover the pot and boil in hot water for about 20 to 30 minutes. Then I lay the containers on a clean, dry cloth. Alright, now that our containers are sterile, we can start with our vegetables. Alright, starting with our napa cabbage, I like to cut it down the butt end, and then I pull the 2 halves apart. That actually looks pretty good. Very nice yellow color in the inner leaves, and I don't see any browning. I'm going to cut the ends of these 2 and pull them apart also. I'm going to continue to cut these until I have 8 equal pieces. I'll cut the pieces smaller later, but this is the perfect size right here. Alright, now I'm going to grab a big bowl of water. You can do this in your sink also, but I'm going to put the cabbage in the water. And I'm just washing it here. I'm just trying to make sure that there isn't any dirt or sand in it. You really want to make sure the cabbage is submerged in the bowl. I'm just shifting each cabbage piece as I add more cabbage to the bowl. That way each of my cabbage pieces thoroughly gets a rinse. Alright, now I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to start cutting the tough end right off the cabbage. Notice that I'm not cutting too far as I don't want the leaves to start separating. See, I just cut the little brown bit off. Okay, now that the cabbage is clean, give me a moment and I'm going to go pour off the water. Alright, now I'm going to grab my cutting board and I'm going to take one of my cabbage pieces and sprinkle salt between all the leaves. This is pink Himalayan salt, but feel free to use basic table salt for this. Anyways, I like to work from the outside leaves inward. Now the reason we're salting this is because we want to pour most of the water out of the cabbage. The salt will also help in creating an environment for good bacteria, specifically lactobacillus, to grow without introducing bad bacteria like bacteria responsible for botulism. Usually we want to use about 2% of the entire weight of the vegetables we're trying to ferment in salt. This is the basics of lacto-fermentation. I'm adding a buttload of salt here, so this will be perfect. Alright, enough food science. I'm making sure to sprinkle salt right down to the stem as that is the thickest part of the cabbage and will take the longest to soften. Okay, now I'm just going to go ahead and continue to salt the rest of my cabbage, and I'm going to place the cabbage to the side and let it sit for about 30 minutes. I'm going to turn the cabbage over in the bowl every 30 minutes or until the thicker part of the cabbage is flimsy and bends without breaking, which should be about a full amount of 2 to 3 hours. Now that our cabbage is macerating, let's get to the other vegetables. I'm going to start with the green onions. I'm just going to cut off the ends and then do a medium diagonal cut. I love texturing my kimchi, so I'm going to keep the green onions just a little bit bigger. Now, if you have pieces that are too big, I would just slice them in half, just like I'm doing right here. All right, this is as small as I'm going to chop them. Now I'm just going to put them back on a plate, and then we're going to work on our carrots. All right, now I'm going to take one of my carrots, and I'm going to slice it in thirds lengthwise. But I'm going to take one of my thirds, and I'm going to slice the side right off. This creates a flat base, which makes the carrots more stable and easier to cut. And remember, really this depends on how small or how big you want your vegetables. Now I'm just going to line them up, and then I'm going to julienne the carrots into matchsticks. There we are, just like that. Now let's work on the daikon radish. I'm pretty much going to treat this like I did the carrots. I'm just going to slice it in half, then I'm going to slice the radish thinly. Like before, I'm going to line the thin slices up, and then I'm going to julienne them also. For my white onion, I'm going to slice it in half, then I'm just going to roughly quarter it. I don't really need the pieces that small, just small enough to fit into my food processor. I'm just going to add it back to my plate with the rest of my vegetables. Next is the garlic. All I'm going to do is peel the garlic. These are just going in the food processor also. I love garlic and I love any recipe that lets me use lots of it. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of these garlic skins. I'm going to add my garlic cloves to the plate and I'm going to get my pear. First I'm going to peel the pear, and don't be afraid if you don't get every piece of the peel, just most of it. Now I'm going to slice it in half. I'm going to cut my halves in half. That gives me fourths, and then I'm going to core the fourths. And then roughly quarter it also. This doesn't have to be that small. Again, it only needs to be small enough to fit in my food processor. I'm going to add my pear to the plate also. Now that's all of our vegetables. All right, now time for the first turn. All right, now all I do is just pick the cabbage up, turn it that way I can make sure that what was on top is on the bottom. And if you want to know it's working, just look at all that water at the bottom right there. Now this isn't quite ready yet, but we're going to go ahead and let it keep resting in the salt solution. Now we're going to make the porridge or our flour-based mixture. I'm going to grab a medium saucepan over a burner, then I'm going to set it to medium heat. Next, I'm going to add some water to the pan, and then sprinkle over our mochiko sweet rice flour. I'm just going to go ahead and stir this together as the water comes up to temperature. I like to keep stirring as it becomes bubbly. You see that? That looks about right. I switched to a whisk because I do want this as smooth as possible. It's fine if it's a little bit thin because it is going to thicken as it cools. Alright, now that's our porridge. Let's put it to the side to cool. Now that the porridge is cooling, let's move on to the veggie puree. Grab your blender or food processor. Today I'm going to be using the Ninja system. If you want to pick up this great food processor system, I will have it linked in the description below. And while we're already segued into another topic, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click that notification bell, that way you never miss when a new video drops. Alright, back to the recipe. I'm starting with my onions. I probably should grab the bigger Ninja system basin, but this one will work. I'm just going to fill it to the top. Now I'm going to grab the top of the blender, then I'm just going to blend this bit. That way that'll give me a little bit more room in the food processor. Okay, that looks pretty good right there. So I'm just going to go ahead and take the top off, and then I'm going to add the rest of the onions. Now while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and add the ginger as well. Now I'm going to blend this also. I'm going to add my peeled garlic cloves. Okay, now let's add the apple. All the sugars from the vegetables and the fruit provide the perfect food for the lactobacillus bacteria. If you want me to make more videos on food science, just let me know in the comments. I'm actually one big nerd who loves food. Alright, that's our veggie puree. Alright, let's turn and check our cabbage. All right, the cabbage is very soft and has reduced quite a bit. The leaves are also pretty flimsy. And as long as the bigger parts of the leaves are flimsy up toward the core, that way we know it's ready. All right, now the next thing I'm gonna do is pour the salt water off the cabbage. At this point, we need to rinse the cabbage. We're trying to get rid of any excess salt. That way our kimchi is not too salty. And don't worry if we're rinsing off the salt. Most of the salt would have been absorbed by the leaves anyway at this point, so we're just gonna get rid of the excess. I like to let my bowl fill up with fresh water, and then I like to press on the cabbage, and then I pour off that water as well. I usually perform the rinsing twice. I'm gonna pour off the second bit of fresh water. Then I'm gonna grab the cabbage and then I'm gonna squeeze it just to get out all the excess water. Okay, now our cabbage is perfectly ready to be worked with. Now let's put everything together. I have a large bowl, and I'm just gonna pour the porridge into the bowl. Then I'm gonna pour in the veggie puree. Let's add in the fish sauce. And lastly, the gochujang or Korean style hot pepper flakes. At this stage, how much you use is really dependent on how spicy you like it. I like it not too spicy, so I'm only adding about 1.5 cups. Now I'm gonna stir it all together until we have a nice homogeneous paste. Just like that. All right, for the next part, I'm gonna go ahead and put on some gloves as this part can be a bit messy. Now I'm gonna add the julienne carrots, daikon radish, and the green onions. All right, now I'm just gonna stir all our vegetables into our paste mixture. These veggies are going to release a lot of the water as well, and that's gonna add to the sauce. If yours look too thick, don't worry about it, because like I said, once the vegetables release their water, it's gonna thin out. Okay, now this looks about right. I'm gonna grab my sterile containers and just make sure that they're right at arm's length, that way I won't have to touch them. I'm gonna take a piece of the cabbage, and I'm gonna start spreading the pepper mixture between all the leaves. I'm making sure I'm adding it to the base of the cabbage also, as that's again the thickest part of the cabbage. I like to start from the outermost leaves and then work my way into the innermost leaves. That way I'm sure to get a thorough coverage. Once I got my cabbage thoroughly covered, I like to pick it up, roll it into a ball, and then I put it into my container. I'm gonna do a second one. Again, I'm gonna go ahead and give me a piece of cabbage. I'm gonna start with the outer leaf right there, then start rubbing all of my mixture onto that leaf. And I'm just gonna follow through with the second leaf, then the third. I'm gonna keep smearing the pepper mixture onto the leaves of the cabbage. That way I get all the leaves covered. And again, you wanna make sure you're getting right up close to that stem because you do not want any part of this uncovered by the pepper spread. Next, you're gonna roll it up and then you're gonna add it to the container. And when you're adding your cabbage to your container, you also wanna make sure you're pressing down because you wanna press out all that oxygen. This is fermentation, so oxygen is bad for this one because it'll actually make it spoil. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and complete the rest of this right quick through the power of movie magique. All right, all I have left is just a few strays of cabbage and just a few strays of the carrots and everything. And I'm just gonna just scrape my bowl and then I'm gonna put that right into the containers also. Remember to keep pressing your cabbage down because we do not want oxygen in this. You see how juicy these things have gotten already? That's those extra vegetables right there. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and take off my gloves so I don't need them anymore. And then we'll go ahead and clean up around those containers. I like to clean around these things thoroughly. I don't really like the idea of something going bad around the edges and then spoiling the whole batch. So yeah, just make sure you wipe everything off. All right, that's our kimchi. Now what we're gonna do next, we're gonna go ahead and get the tops, and then we're gonna seal each one of them. If I can get this one to seal. All right, that's on there. So let me go ahead and seal the second one. Okay, and that's perfectly fine right there. Now I like to take a piece of paper or a sticky note and just write on the date that this was completed, and then I'm gonna write the date that it's actually gonna be done. I usually ferment these things on the table at room temperature for about 3 days. All right, so the kimchi is dated. I'll see you in 3 days. All right, it is now 3 days later and our kimchi should be ready. I did cover mine since I didn't have a dark place to put it. Also remember, your kimchi will ferment a lot quicker if your room is hot, so do keep that in mind. Now let's open it and see if we got an activity. You see those bubbles? That's perfect. That means we have successfully fermented this. Those are carbon dioxide bubbles, and that's produced by the bacteria. From now on, we're gonna go ahead and store this in the refrigerator. It will still ferment in the refrigerator, but at a much slower pace. But keep in mind, the longer you keep your kimchi, the more sour it'll get. You can still use it, but some people don't like super sour kimchi. Or they even use the more sour kind in stews or soup. Remember, if you store your kimchi right, it'll last for months. All right, now for the moment we've been waiting for. Then we have to taste the kimchi. I'm just gonna grab a piece. I'm gonna take my knife and just fish out one piece. I'm gonna put it on my cutting board, and then we're just gonna chop it into nice bite-sized pieces. I usually like it where it's a nice size where you can pick it up with some chopsticks or if you're using a fork. I'm doing this more gingerly than you really have to, but you really can kind of cut it up however you like it. I'm piling my pieces up on a plate. Then we just had a little bit more design to it. Your boy loves a good presentation. Then the last thing I like to do is take a little bit of juice from the rest of the kimchi and just spread it on top right there. Then doesn't that look nice? Now for the moment of truth. Let's try the kimchi by itself. Oh, that's very nice. It's tangy, spicy but not too spicy. Has a bit of that funk from the fish sauce, which adds to the umami flavor. This is the perfect side dish. But to be honest, I snack on kimchi all the time by itself. Let's try some with some rice. I'm gonna grab a big old piece this time. Oh my God, that's pretty good. This definitely adds to any bland food. This is simply delicious. Alright guys, that's my video. Well, I hope you enjoy watching it as much as I enjoyed making this video. Let me know in the comment section if there's anything else you'd love to see me make on this channel. This has been Leslie. I'll see you in the next one, foodies.